So many of our kids are now shut-ins, devoid of personal interaction. We gotta get out of our bubbles. We gotta mingle. It's time to mingle.
I know what's wrong with America. We're living in an age of conflict brought about by disconnect, which has frayed the fabric of our nation. It has polarized our politics. It has harmed the mental health of our kids. But I think I know how to fix it. At long last, welcome to the Mingle Project. Go forth and mingle. Thank you.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Mingle Project, titled, Are the Kids All Right? The Mingle Project, shorthand for my look at societal disconnect, political polarization, and a prescription for what separates us. Namely, I advocate for the restoration of common experience. If you're new to the Mingle Project, please view the other episodes here on my YouTube channel, including the full-length Mingle movie. I was not familiar with Aidan Walker until I was with him on Real Time with Bill Maher a couple of weeks ago, an episode where I was a panelist. He was Bill's lead guest. Quite an honor for a guy who's 26.
I think that people need to come together more. I think the temperature needs to be turned down. And I think it's not just, there's a crisis of affordability, whether people will be able to have that deal of like job, house, retirement. That feels like we were taught in all the TV shows we watched, people had that. But I think it's also a crisis of meaning as well. It's giving people those social bonds, making them turn their heads up out of the phone when they're on their commute and look at their neighbors and the people around them. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, giving everybody this shot at dignity and this shot at being seen in our culture, which I think that's, to me, is the way out. I'm optimistic looking at the people in my comments who are sharing their experiences when I post a video. I'm optimistic looking at people I see on the scroll. TikTok is filled with weirdos and freaks who predict the rapture, or just bottles of wine rolling down staircases, or weird sludge ASMR. But it's also filled with people just sharing their stories, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, good to have that perspective.
I thought he was terrific. He's an internet culture researcher, a meme researcher with a huge social media footprint due to his informed and provocative views. And you can find more on Aidan Walker at Substack, where he writes under the heading, How to Do Things with Memes. Aidan, thank you for being here. How was the Maher experience? What did you take away from that?
It was a great experience. Thanks so much for having me, Michael. It was very interesting to be, in the center of traditional media. It was the first time I'd ever been on television. And
wow,
I'm
really?
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
you crushed it for a maiden voyage, man. I pardon my interruption, but that show's a hard show to do because it's a live audience, they're firing up the crowd, the thumping bass of the music, and then bang, you walk out after the monologue.
Yeah, it was pretty intimidating. And like I said, I'm used to just filming myself for TikTok. And then with that, I get to edit out everything. So I get to say like exactly what I mean to say.
Right.
But live talking to Bill, it was a challenge, but he's a real pro. Like the way he was looking at me on set when he was interviewing me, he's a great stage partner. He has a great sense of timing. And so I felt very, taken care of by him and the whole crew as well.
And I thought you did terrific, and I'm a big Maher fan. We don't always see eye to eye. One of my visits on his show didn't go well. Please don't Google it. You'll only add to the count. But I appreciated the way that you were not intimidated and on the whole dating sort of trans reference that he made. You stood your ground, and I thought it was your finest moment.
Thank you. Yeah. That was a bit of a strange moment. It wasn't something I planned to talk about. It's not something I'm an expert on. So I kind of felt like I wanted to keep it to memes and internet culture. And one thing I think a lot of folks don't understand about memes and internet culture is it's such a big topic. It's like talking about music or like talking about books or something, And so sure, it touches into all these different social issues, but that's not like the main angle on
I get it
for me.
All right, let's do this. So September 2nd, 2025 at Substack under the headline, Everywhere is Ohio. Let me read this opening paragraph. Everywhere is Ohio. Everything is mid. We pay $19 for a handheld at the Millennial Burger Place, and after finishing the food during the 10 minutes left in our lunch break, dream of traveling somewhere just to sit in the hotel room for hours, choosing the right filter to put over the photos we took so that people back home can gaze on us between bong rips, rounds of Fortnite, or back pain inducing double shifts and mutter to themselves, "Oh, she seems to really be living. What am I even doing with my life?" before closing the app, going to Hinge, making a series of snap judgments about the attractiveness of dead-eyed, equally desperate strangers with airplane emojis in their bio and the web portal for ICE applications open on their grimy gaming PCs with crumbs caught under every key. Beautifully written. What the fuck does it mean?
Thank you. Yeah. So there's a lot of like online culture references in that, but where I kind of wanted to go with it was beginning from the sense that everywhere is Ohio. Ohio in recent years has become this meme just for anything that's like American and uncanny, only in Ohio, and it'll be a blurry picture of some cryptid. Or, it'll be some deep fried meme, where the contrast and the color is turned up to max and the image looks crazy. And it'll say this is a picture of Ohio. And so I kind of wanted to say everywhere is Ohio because it's this idea of just the American average, but that it's totally, unhinged or totally kind of berserk, like Hunter S. Thompson type territory almost. And then with that sentence, I had a lot of fun sort of writing that opening. I kind of wanted to go through and say, between these different screens that we're looking at, where we're doing various things, where we're posting the vacation photo on Instagram for everybody to envy, where we're gaming just to, escape reality and be in this other world, where we're kind of looking for love on Hinge, which is a platform that ultimately probably wants you to stay on the app rather than have a date and be off the app. That there's this sense that we're sort of trying to live our lives in this surreal landscape that is controlled by these companies that don't really care about us, but even more so than by the companies, these automated processes that aren't really thinking about us or holding us in the way that we'd like to be held by the civic infrastructure around us. And that it's something I observe a lot with my generation and older people and younger people. I'm 26. I'm not that young anymore, but it's just how do you figure things out in an environment like that?
It's all quite depressing to me. Are you depressed? Because on Mar, you seemed optimistic, and I'm now the old guy in the room. I'd love for Aidan Walker to tell me why this shouldn't bum me out.
So I go back and forth. I'm depressed by a lot of things that I see on the news, that I see on social media. But along with that, I have a sense of hope because I think as you see people kind of struggle to get by in this sort of surreal world where, their attention is being farmed and mined for money, where their intimate relationships are now kind of fodder for big companies or, opportunistic grifters to feed on, people still manage to like express themselves and get their humanity out there, which is why I come into it from studying memes. I really see memes as a form of art, and I see online community as really important. And I think a lot of it is like people are trying to overcome these big odds. And that's what gives me hope. The odds themselves, the conditions and the environment that we're kind of forced to live through, that's what makes me scared and depressed.
I don't want to, fall into the trap of, oh, the kids these days, because I was once one of the kids that they were saying that about. It's just that I feel that people your generation in many respects have, and I have 4 sons who are contemporary, 3 sons and a daughter, pardon me, who are contemporaries of yours. But I feel like the deck is stacked so much against you because in the internet high-speed world in which we're living, those platforms have your number. And I didn't have that influence working against my best interest. I mean, in a nutshell, that's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree. The deck is stacked against us, and people are trying to play the best hand that they've got. I think elsewhere in that post that you mentioned, I say, the average American, and to the extent any of us can speak for the average American.
I love this graph. Please go ahead and read that.
Yeah, it's the trap sort of like debt, Temu, porn, video games, slop, all this stuff, and you've seen people around you get sucked into it, because these platforms are kind of mining our brains and pulling us into these profitable rabbit holes that are not good for us. But I think at the same time, there's kind of this constant rubbing against the grain and playing against it, like there's subreddits where people are giving each other advice. There's YouTubes where people are teaching each other how to cook, repair a car, clean, There's podcasts where people are learning about history that they weren't taught in school. And so at the same time as there's this deck that's stacked against us, I do think there's a lot of people online who are creatively trying to play those hands and sort of know the hazards in front of them. And it's really a double-edged sword. One part of the social media platforms is really cutting against us, but the other part is allowing people who live in these places where, the bowling alone thesis, 1993, there's no civic life going on, there's no community, but you can go on Reddit or X or TikTok and find people who like the same things you do. And so I think one of my friends, Adam Alexic, who also is a content creator, says we're trying to subversively harness these platforms. I'm trying to take this slot machine built to sell Timu and use it to make people more reflective about their lives and express something that's important and true to me. And I see lots of people doing that as well. So that's where the hope comes from. I wish that it were a stronger hope and the odds weren't so stacked against us.
So I'm glad that you referenced Putnam, because I'm a student of Bowling Alone, and that book meant a great deal to me. And in the same sort of genre, not only what he wrote 20 years ago, but also more contemporary, Gene Twangy with iGen, Bill Bishop with The Big Sort, and here's one that's going to push your button, Jonathan Haidt with The Anxious Generation. So I've fallen into, I've read, the criticisms that you've offered, but I have fallen into this position of believing that 2012 happens, more than half of Americans now walking around with a smartphone, Facebook acquires Instagram, it's the beginning of the selfie era, and it touches off this period of steep spikes in mental health statistics for our youth. And Gene Twangy, more than Haidt, Twangy has convinced me of the causal connection between it all, but you're more suspect.
Yeah, I'm more suspect for two reasons. The first is I think around 2012 and even more recently post-pandemic, there's a lot of other things going on which help to explain that spike. Like I think, the worsening inequality, the continued degradation of the environment, I think these are really, really big factors. And I think that because life now happens through the phone often is the vessel carrying those things into people's minds and into their day-to-day lives. And so I think there's a little bit, it's not monocausal, certainly. The second reason why I sort of differ from those sorts of findings is a bit more like practical, because I think if we get to a place where we say, okay, let's, ban phones, take these reasonable sounding recommendations, protect kids from it, I don't think that solves the root cause, which to me are these deeper structural issues. And I think that might take us to a place where, as I mentioned, it's a double-edged sword, right? So one part of the platforms is working against people, the other part is working for them. We cut off those kinds of communities and routes of access to voice and to power that people have. And then what are you left with? You're left with an America where, our biggest tool for people power and democratic change at a time of big, authoritarian creep and increasing,
See,
inequality.
I think that
I'm kind of attached to that side of the
okay,
internet.
so I think what I hear and what I've read from your work is that Aidan Walker looks at the primary drivers as including income inequality, this growing gulf between two Americas. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And so my analysis is one predicated on, and that's a part of it, but it's predicated on fragmentation. We've all gone in our separate direction. The internet has made self-sorting much, much easier. And while you look glass half full at that smartphone as being able to connect you with someone who has that similar interest of yours, and that's true, but it ignores the fact that it also allows you to avoid time spent with people of dissimilar interest, in particular politics. And now you get to hang with people who are just like Aidan Walker in terms of whatever your interest might be. And what we most lack, and what I loosely describe as my Mingle project, what we most lack is common experience like that which my parents, your grandparents had, where they were joiners. And they were establishing social capital all across the country through community involvement and volunteerism and a charity of their choice and bridging differences. That's what worries me the most. So I'm looking for you to tell me that I'm wrong and there's an optimistic future that awaits us.
I don't think you're entirely wrong. Like I said, I'm also a student of Putnam. I also go with that thesis. I do think that phones have not had an entirely positive impact on life and society, but I see it a little bit in terms of how the structure is arrayed. we're used to thinking in terms of checks and balances with the constitutional order, co-equal branches. The executive checks the legislative, checks the courts. But I think in the broader social contract and civil society, that's that same thing. You have major media organizations, you have independent media, you have labor unions, you have the government, you have big corporations. And I think maybe 50 years ago, that balance of power was a lot more stable. And now the internet has come and disrupted it. And I think there's sort of two prongs to that disruption. There's the disruption of, individual people, entrepreneurs, grifters, creators, whatever, who are creating these echo chambers and these bubbles that will lead to more radicalization, will lead to the loss of a common experience. And then there's the other prong of it, which is these platforms that have inserted themselves as middlemen with every transaction, whether it's people exchanging words about an idea, whether it's people exchanging money. If you have a business, you better be on Amazon, you better be on Google. And I think that kind of seizure of authority and that kind of insertion of themselves into everything we do is much more toxic than what individual people are doing. And so where I see hope is in kind of individual people being able to confront that sort of monopolistic power grab, which I see as the real thing that's isolating folks. Like there's extremism on the right, extremism on the left. But I think the bigger thing here is that we might be in a situation where it's profitable for people to become extremist for the companies that are trying to puppeteer us.
Absolutely. We have a whole cottage industry that rewards extremists among us, both in politics and in the media. I mean, that's what I'm trying to expose, when in fact I argue that the majority of us are nuanced and might be, conservative on fiscal matters and socially progressive or liberal. Okay, hold that thought. We'll return to episode 5 of The Mingle Project with our special guest, Aidan Walker, right after this.
This is Parks.
This is how you roll, this is how it goes. This is how you pop, this is how you rock. Take a chance, do a dance, little romance. This is how you. This is how you win. This is how you excite, this is how you all night. 360 hit me, now we're going all in. I can feel it calling, the crowd, the light, the night, the sights, the vibe is right. This is how you. This is
Parks, Pennsylvania's #1 casino experience. This is how you win.
Welcome back to episode 5 of The Mingle Project, which we've titled, Are the Kids All Right? Aidan Walker, you can find his work on Substack. He's my guest. He writes under the heading, How to Do Things with Memes. Help me with the pronunciation. I want to hear about the theory of groypification. How did I do?
Groypification. That was perfect. Yeah.
All right. What is it?
So the term is coined by John Gans, who's another writer at Substack, Unpopular Front. But it's this sense that the staffer class of not even the right, but kind of the Trumpist, far right, has been watching and digesting these memes for their entire lives. And at this point, these guys are, in their 30s. Like there was that Politico story on the Young Republicans group chat. These guys are like 32. They're not that young.
Right.
But it's this sense that the staff class is influenced by these fringe memes, by this kind of shit posting vernacular and attitude. And that rather than having people who, maybe like grew up listening to Glenn Beck or something, you have people who grew up, on the 4chan green texts, looking at white supremacist, sexist, anti-LGBT memes. And this really changes kind of the nature and the texture of the policy we're seeing from the administration, and also like why they're doing things. It's not for these coherent, reasoned things of like, oh, we're conservative, we believe X, Y, and Z, which one can understand, one can rationalize with this. It's because they're like, this will get me tons of likes.
Is there a corollary? Is there a corollary on the left?
I'd say that to some extent there is. The left is very online, but I frankly just don't see it to the same. It's like the difference between getting shot and getting punched to me. The extremism on the left might have some issues, but it's not nearly to this degree, and it's not nearly as empowered. And I don't think it nearly is as toxic. The furthest left people will call for, a vague sense of solidarity or a revolution. The furthest people on the right will call for, deportations and violence mobilized by the state.
Aidan, am I wrong to be very concerned about, in particular, our young men, and to have a perception that too many are spending too much time with internet porn, with gaming, rudderless, and now struggling in a world where women who are their contemporaries are outperforming them in education and consequently income?
I think you're right to be concerned about the first part of that, but not really the second.
Why not?
I mean, because I don't think it's like a competition between men and women or boys and girls. I think that things are constantly changing. There has been a lot of social instability, I think, created by, the sexual revolution, the stuff that you saw when you were young. That's still reverberating. But I'd say the deeper problem is, young men are rudderless, not because girls do better in school, but because, they're no longer captains of their own lives. The captains of their lives are Amazon. It's Bezos. He's taken our future and turned it into
But
a
why
yacht
why
or
is
a
that
rocket.
impacting our men more so than our women? And I don't view it. By the way, I don't view it as a zero-sum game. I don't. I'm married to a strong woman, and I'm the son of a strong woman. So I get it. I'm for girl power. I don't mean to suggest that like every victory for a female is a consequential loss for a male. But why are these trends impacting men more than women? Why aren't they
I'd say,
rudderless?
yeah, I'd say a big part of it is kind of the way that masculinity pushes men to be. I think that men have a lot less physical touch. They have a lot less mingling going on in their lives, just sort of the way that the gender roles in our culture are set up. And I think that there's many ways in which men are more vulnerable than women to loneliness and to these sorts of fallings behind. But I think too, the girls are not okay either. I mean, there's this whole online thing of like trad wives and like, do you even want to have a career? Like there's incels, but then there's also femcells. And so while I do think that sometimes men are the canary in the coal mine, all of us are birds who are far too deep underground for our own good.
What can I do with my platforms to try and build bridges relative to the fragmentation that I see among us? You're the person, you're the meme expert. Memes are it seems like, the whole direction for so many among us. What's the message I should be conveying?
I think one thing that I love about memes is it's not necessarily like a cartoon where all the message is in the picture, in the text. The message happens kind of through and across them, right? So a meme is an image we're all sharing, and then I put my own words on it. You see that post, you put your own words on it. And so I think having media products that are a lot more interactive, that solicit a lot more from the audience, that allow people to make their voices heard. I mean, like a call-in radio show is an example of this in an earlier era. I think that's the kind of thing. And having Americans be able to talk to each other, be able to borrow the platforms of others. So I don't know. I've only been in this business for like a year or two. But what I think is most powerful is understanding myself as a creator. I'm a mouthpiece for others, really. I'm here for my audience. I'm here because 150,000 people saw me yapping about something and said, "Oh, I agree with him. He has a point there." And so I think that insofar as I'm able to, receive DMs about, say, some, Mexican meme that people want to see covered, and then I make a video about it, that's when I feel most like a success, is when I use my platform to be an amplifier to others that I believe in, and that, I help to articulate something that my audience wants to see articulated, that they're looking for the terms to say themselves. And I don't think I'm always successful at that. I don't think any of us are, but I don't know. If I were you, that's what I'd do, and I think you already do a
Aidan,
great
I'm,
deal.
I'm, I'm trying to come to terms with this area of your expertise, but I have to say that the person who I think gets it, I'm curious to hear your reaction, is our 79-year-old president. I mean, he's right. I mean, he seems to be.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in the aftermath of no kings, and I thought his meme was coarse and out of bounds, but himself flying in an airplane and dropping excrement, feces all over those who were protesting him, and yet it got a lot of attention. It got a lot of buzz, right? And he arguably he leveled the news cycle that day. It was both him doing that and watching millions of people, 7 million people come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has always understood the internet much better than a lot of the other politicians, in part because he came from the entertainment world. So I think he just has a sense of, what's sensational. And I think dropping excrement on people, that would also do numbers on TV, I bet, certain types of TV. And so I think that and this, we're talking about groupification, kind of the staffers being very plugged in, very online. I would say in general, I think the right has been much better at leveraging the internet than the left or the center. And part of that is because the left and the center have always felt more at home on traditional media, or at least for the last 20, 30 years, have felt more at home there. And insofar as the president is not an early adopter of like AI generated videos, but certainly uses them to great effect. I think part of why that works is because it's part of what his audience is seeing every day. So in a way, he's echoing and mirroring back to them the online worlds that we live in. And so I don't think it's a true picture of American life, but it certainly resonates with the other stuff people are seeing, because you'll scroll social media and you'll have an AI generated slop reel, an ad for razor blades, and then the president's AI generated reel, which is also an ad for him. And it kind of fits into that.
A final question, and thanks for being so gracious with your time. I downloaded Sora, and within 10 minutes, I had Marine One landing in a very convincing fashion in my backyard. I'm really worried, again, because I have a political focus, that now comes the era where I'm a lawyer. It used to be, well, look what the video shows. Those days are over, right? Because the video in very convincing fashion is going to show any and everything, and we're going to put people in places they never dreamed of being.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things I'd say to that. The first is it ties back to this thing I've kept saying that, OpenAI is moving fast and breaking things, as the tech, kind of expression goes. So it's kind of a money grab, get more buzz, get more investors. And it's kind of like, it's not our responsibility, the downstream social implications of that. But then the second thing I'd say, which is a bit of a cause for optimism, is I was at Know Your Meme, which is an online meme encyclopedia covering this stuff, around the time the first generators came out in 2023, 2024. And one of my favorite memes that I tracked there was AI presidents gaming, where people use these technologies to like make deep fakes of, Trump, Obama, Biden, playing Minecraft and being like potty-mouthed 17-year-olds. And those memes are silly, they were funny, but I think they also had a serious component in that it was people on the internet saying, all right, here, look what this technology can do. This really does sound like Biden. This really does look like him. And he's doing something that Biden would never do. But look at how dangerous this is. And so I think with a lot of the early AI memes using these generators, what we saw was people, in part to go viral because these are just crazy, funny videos, but I think also to warn one another and build up a kind of immunity. And so I think every time one of these platforms does something, there's sort of a response from internet users of kind of trying to help one another and preserve one another. And that's how I sort of read those memes. And I hope that a skepticism towards videos and images online is building in people, and memes are a piece of that, and that could help counteract some of that erosion of truth.
Aidan, that was excellent. Wipe the slate clean and tell us one thing that you'd like to leave us with. What do you most want to convey?
I guess one thing I'd most like to convey is that memes and internet culture are a form of art. And just like with books, there's sometimes like trashy, romantasy or, schlock or whatever. But then there's also, big works of art. And I think memes and the artists behind them and the audiences who support them have a lot to say and are really interesting. And that some of the answers lie there, not all of them, but they're a piece of the puzzle.
Aidan, thank you. I'm really appreciative of your time.
Thanks so much for having me and for your great questions.
Okay, gang, episode 5, The Mingle Project, in the can. Aidan Walker, I thought it was great. I've got to go back and watch this another time or two because there's a lot that I need to learn from him. Thank you for being here. Episode 6 is just around the corner. Gang, if you've been watching me on YouTube, first, thank you for that. I hope you're enjoying the daily poll question. I hope you're enjoying the Mingle Project. I hope you're enjoying all the interviews that I do. I don't want you to miss out when I'm next live. It's simple. Click subscribe right below the video and then hit that little bell icon. When you subscribe and turn on notifications, you'll know exactly when to jump in and join the conversation. Go ahead, hit subscribe, click the bell, and I'll see you live right here on YouTube. Thank you.